The night sky stretched endlessly above Sarah's small town, a vast canvas of stars twinkling like diamonds in the dark. Sarah had always loved this time of night, peaceful, quiet, and full of endless possibilities. At 8 years old, she had a curious mind that often led her to the edge of the woods behind her house, where she'd sit on the swing and watch the heavens above. Her parents never understood it, how a young girl could be so entranced by the stars, but Sarah didn't mind. She was different, and she loved it. It was a Friday evening, and Sarah had just finished her homework. The air was crisp, and she was waiting for her mom to call her in for bed. But tonight something felt different. A soft, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, and it wasn't the usual evening breeze. Sarah's eyes shifted from the swing's ropes to the sky. It had been a long day, but for some reason, she felt drawn to the stars, as if something up there was calling to her. She stood up and made her way to the farthest corner of the yard, just past the garden where the flowers grew wild. The hum grew louder, like a low vibration in the atmosphere. At first she thought it was just her imagination, but then something happened. A flash of light shot across the sky, faster than a shooting star, its brilliance so bright that it illuminated the entire yard in a flash of white. Sarah gasped, her heart leaping in her chest. She had never seen anything like it. For a moment she stood frozen, her eyes locked on the trail of light. It seemed to hover for just a second before it slowly descended toward her backyard. The sound of a distant engine rumbled through the night air, but it was unlike any vehicle she'd ever heard. It was smooth, almost mechanical, but with a strange reverberation that seemed to pierce the air in waves. "Is it a plane?" Sarah whispered to herself. But no, it was moving too slowly for that, and there was no sound of engines whirring. The light was now much closer. Sarah's instinct screamed at her to turn and run into the house to find her parents, but the curiosity inside her, her insatiable hunger for discovery, overpowered the fear. Slowly she took a step forward, her bare feet cold on the dewy grass. And then it happened. The object descended lower and lower until it was just above the trees. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized that it was a ship. Not any ship she recognized. It was large, round, and metallic, its surface reflecting the moonlight as it hovered just above the ground. The hum had intensified to a low rumble, almost like the sound of thunder approaching. As the ship lowered, it emitted a soft, golden glow, casting a strange light across the yard. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she couldn't pull herself away. She was captivated by the glow, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss, and out stepped the figures. They were tall, easily 8 feet, and cloaked in dark, shimmering armor that reflected the same eerie glow as the ship. Their skin was an unnatural shade of pale gray, smooth and almost translucent. Their eyes, however, were what truly held Sarah's attention. They were not human eyes. They were large, almond-shaped, and glowing bright yellow, with irises that seemed to burn with an inner fire. Sarah's heart began to race as she backed away, her body suddenly frozen in terror. She tried to scream, but her throat felt tight, and no sound emerged. The creatures stood still for a moment, their heads turning in unison to study her. It was as though they could sense her fear, and they relished it. The leader, a creature much taller than the rest, took a slow step forward. Its eyes never left Sarah. Then, without warning, it spoke. Not in any language Sarah could comprehend, but somehow she understood. "Come with us, little one." Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to run, to scream, to flee back into the house where she would be safe. But she couldn't move. Her legs felt like they were made of stone. The creature stepped closer, its long, skeletal hand extending toward her. Its fingers were long and slender, ending in sharp, claw-like tips that glinted in the moonlight. Despite the terror coursing through her, Sarah couldn't look away. There was something hypnotic about the creature, something magnetic. Her mind screamed at her to resist, to fight, but the words from the creature echoed in her head. "Come with us, little one." Before she could react, the creature's clawed hand gripped her wrist with unnatural strength. She gasped, a sharp breath escaping her as the creature pulled her toward the ship. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, and for a moment she felt as though she was floating. Her body was light, and she couldn't seem to grasp onto anything real. The moment she crossed the threshold of the ship, the door closed behind her with a soft hiss, and the ship lifted off the ground with a smooth, almost silent motion. The outside world disappeared in an instant. Sarah felt the pressure in her ears as the ship ascended, and the night sky outside vanished into the depths of space. Her stomach lurched as the ship sped through the atmosphere, and she wondered if she would ever see her home again. The interior of the ship was nothing like she had imagined. It was vast, larger than it seemed on the outside. The walls were made of smooth, metallic surfaces that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. A low hum filled the air, but there was no sound of engines or propulsion. It felt almost as though they were floating, gliding silently through the stars. The creatures, whatever they were, had led her down a long corridor to a small, circular room. The walls were lined with strange symbols that seemed to shift and change with the movement of the ship. Sarah was placed gently onto a cold metal table in the center of the room, and before she could say a word, a voice filled her mind. It was soft, soothing, yet chilling at the same time. "Do not be afraid, little one. You are safe, for now." The voice was not spoken aloud, yet Sarah could hear it as if it were coming from inside her own head. Her heart pounded, but she didn't speak. Instead, she looked around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. Suddenly, the door to the room opened again, and in walked two more figures. They were not the same as the others. These beings were massive, easily 10 feet tall, with thick, muscular bodies covered in scales that shimmered like metal. They had wings, enormous wings that folded neatly behind them. Their eyes were glowing red, like burning embers, and their mouths were full of sharp, jagged teeth. Dragons. Sarah's breath hitched as she realized the creatures before her were not just alien, they were dragons. But these were not the dragons of myths or fairy tales. These were real, and they were terrifying. One of the dragons let out a low growl as it stepped forward, its massive claws scraping against the floor. The other dragon followed, its eyes narrowing as it focused on Sarah. She wanted to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed. The dragons circled her, their bodies massive and intimidating. Their presence filled the room, making it feel smaller and smaller with every passing second. Just as Sarah felt as though she couldn't take it any longer, the hue in the room shifted. The dragons froze, their eyes darting to the control panel in the corner. Something was happening. The walls of the room flickered with strange energy, and the dragons seemed to recoil, their bodies shuddering. The leader of the dragons snarled, its wings unfurling in a defensive posture. It opened its mouth, but before it could release a roar, the entire room was engulfed in a brilliant light. The dragons screamed in agony, their bodies writhing in pain. Sarah watched in shock as the leader of the dragons, the one closest to her, began to shrink, its massive form compressing as if it were being pulled in different directions. The other dragons followed suit, their bodies twisting and warping before they disappeared entirely. For a moment the room was still. The only sound was Sarah's own breathing, shallow and quick. She blinked, unsure of what had just happened. The voice returned, this time softer, more familiar. "You have been chosen, Sarah. This is only the beginning." The light faded, and the dragons were gone. The room, now empty, felt eerily silent. Sarah stood there, trembling, not sure what had just transpired. What did the voice mean? What was happening to her? And most importantly, why had she been chosen? The stars outside the ship flickered as if in response to her unspoken questions, their light distant and cold. Something was coming, something vast and terrifying, and Sarah had no choice but to face it. The discovery had only just begun. Sarah's body felt like it was trapped in a strange dream, one where nothing made sense but everything seemed vividly real. The brilliance of the light that had consumed the room left an afterimage in her vision, and for a moment she thought she might have simply imagined the entire thing. Perhaps it was just a nightmare, a horrible product of too many late-night science fiction shows and her vivid imagination. But when she looked around, when she saw the metallic walls of the alien ship, the unfamiliar control panels humming with quiet energy, and the void of space stretching out beyond the tiny portholes, she knew with a shuddering certainty that this was no dream. Sarah's legs were still trembling as she stood in the center of the cold, featureless room. The air smelled sterile, with a faint metallic tang that made her throat itch. She could feel the ship's strange hum reverberating through the floor, deep into her bones, a constant, unyielding vibration. But amidst the quiet terror was a flicker of something else, something deeper. Was it curiosity? The voice that had spoken to her earlier echoed again in her mind, a sound that wasn't quite words, yet somehow reached deep into her consciousness. "You are safe, for now. This place will show you what you must know." She could almost feel the presence of the voice around her, as though it wasn't just an entity within her mind, but a part of the very ship itself. It was a strange sensation, like she was connected to something much larger than herself. The moment the voice faded, Sarah looked around again, her eyes falling on the door at the far end of the room. For a moment, she considered staying put, not moving, waiting for someone, anyone, to come and explain what was happening. But the silence, the eerie sense of isolation, made her skin crawl. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the door. She paused, one hand on the cold handle, hesitant. What if she was walking right into danger? What if the creatures, those aliens, the dragons, were waiting for her on the other side? "Do not be afraid, Sarah. This ship is meant for you. It will not harm you." The voice spoke again, calm and reassuring. Sarah let out a shaky breath, unsure if the reassurance was real or if she was simply losing her grip on reality. But her instincts told her that she had no choice but to press forward. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and stepped through the door. The hallway was even larger than the room she had just left, stretching infinitely in both directions. The walls were made of smooth, metallic surfaces that glowed faintly, as if pulsing with life. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, but they weren't like anything Sarah had ever seen. The symbols shifted and rearranged themselves constantly, like an alien language written in motion. At the far end of the hallway, the light from a larger chamber spilled into the corridor. She could hear distant voices, but they were faint and distorted, as though they were being transmitted from another world entirely. Sarah hesitated. What was beyond the door at the end of the hallway? Who, or what, was waiting for her? Her heart pounded as she moved cautiously forward. Each step felt like it took her further from the world she knew, deeper into the unknown. She had no way of knowing what awaited her, but something inside her, Something deep within her soul told her that she was meant to be here. You were chosen, Sarah. The voice spoke again, clear and deliberate. There was no fear, no hesitation in its tone. It was as if it knew everything, as though it had seen all the paths her life had taken and had guided her to this moment. The door at the end of the hallway slid open as she approached, revealing a vast room that stretched out before her. The walls were lined with what looked like intricate control panels, though Sarah didn't understand what any of them did. The room was bathed in a soft ethereal light, and floating in the center of it all was a strange, pulsing orb, its surface shifting like liquid, glistening with vibrant iridescent colors. For a moment, Sarah was mesmerized. It was like staring into the heart of the universe itself, an object of pure wonder and mystery. She could feel its energy, a force that seemed to call to her, pulling her closer to it. Without thinking, she moved toward the orb. As her fingers hovered just above its surface, a surge of energy shot through her body. She gasped, her mind spinning as the light from the orb intensified, filling the entire room with a brilliance so intense that it felt like it was burning into her very soul. Then, everything stopped. The light dimmed, and the orb seemed to settle, as if it had been waiting for her touch. The voice spoke once more, softer now, but still full of authority. "You are the one. You hold the key." Sarah's head spun as the words reverberated in her mind. What did it mean? What key? The dragons are not what they seem. They are guardians of a power much older than you can imagine. And you are the one who will unlock it. Before Sarah could react, the door at the far side of the room opened, revealing a large, shadowy figure. She froze, her body tensing instinctively. It was one of the creatures, the tall, armored beings that had abducted her from Earth. But this one was different. It was taller, its armor darker, and its eyes burned with a cold, calculating fire. The creature stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. "You should not have touched it." Sarah took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The creature's voice was low, menacing, like a storm building on the horizon. She didn't know if it was a threat or a warning, but instinct told her she needed to be careful. "The orb was never meant for your kind. The power within it belongs to us, not to you." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure what was going on, but she understood one thing clearly. The creatures that had taken her were not friendly, and their intentions were far darker than she had imagined. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment Sarah felt as though it could see right through her, reading her every thought. It was as if her very soul was laid bare before it. "You were chosen, but you are not ready. You cannot control the power you have unlocked. You will destroy everything if you continue down this path." The words sent a wave of fear crashing over Sarah. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew that whatever power lay within her, it was dangerous. The thought of destroying everything, her world, her family, everything she knew, was unbearable. "You will not survive this." The creature took another step forward, and for a moment Sarah thought it would attack. But before it could move any closer, a loud, high-pitched sound filled the room. The walls began to vibrate, and the light from the orb flared once again, brighter this time, almost blinding. The creature recoiled, its eyes narrowing. The pulse of light seemed to push the creature back, and for a moment it looked as if it might be forced to retreat. Sarah didn't know what was happening, but she could feel the energy building inside her, swirling around her like a storm. The orb's light wasn't just reacting to her, it was responding to her emotions, her fears, her very presence. It was as if she was somehow linked to the ship, to this strange force that had brought her here. "You are the key," the voice echoed again. louder this time. "You must choose." The room shook violently as the creature raised its hand, its claws extending toward her, but before it could strike, the entire ship groaned. The walls trembled, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze in place. Then, without warning, the ship lurched and Sarah was thrown to the ground. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the creature's eyes, wide, full of fear, and staring directly at her. When Sarah opened her eyes, the ship had changed. The walls were no longer smooth and metallic. Instead, they were covered in strange vines, glowing with soft golden light. The hum of the ship had quieted, replaced by a new, softer energy. She was no longer in the orb room, but in a new, unfamiliar place. A sanctuary of sorts, one that seemed to pulse with life. The air was warm, calming, and she could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful around her. And in the center of the room stood the creature, the one who had warned her. But now it was different. Its posture was no longer threatening, but almost reverent. "You have awakened it," it said softly, its voice no longer menacing. "And you have awakened me." The strange light faded, and the room grew eerily still, almost too quiet for comfort. Sarah lay on the floor of the newly transformed room, her breath shallow and erratic. Her body ached from the sudden, violent lurch of the ship, but her mind was far more disoriented than her physical state. The earlier events, the voice in her mind, the glowing orb, the strange creatures, all of it felt too surreal to process. Personally, but one thing was undeniable. Whatever had just happened, it had set something in motion. The creature, the one she had thought was her captor, now stood before her, but it no longer seemed threatening. Its eyes, once glowing with a fiery, calculating hue, were now dimmed, full of an almost reverential sadness. Sarah pushed herself up, her hands trembling, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The walls of the room were no longer smooth and metallic. Instead, they were covered in something that looked almost organic, like thick vines, their greenish tendrils winding up and down in intricate patterns. The vines pulsed with a soft, golden glow, casting the room in an ethereal light. The hum of the ship had quieted too, replaced by a strange, almost melodic undertone that seemed to resonate within her chest, calming her nerves just a little. What's happening?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. The creature didn't immediately answer. Instead, it studied her, its large, almond-shaped eyes scanning her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. It seemed to be considering something, weighing the consequences of what it was about to say. "You awakened the core," the creature said softly, its voice low and haunting. "And with it, you awakened me." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. The core? She glanced around at the now alive ship, the vines and glowing surfaces, trying to make sense of the words. "What's that? What are you talking about?" The creature sighed, a deep, resonant sound that reverberated through the air. It stepped closer to her, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was unsure how to approach her. It extended one long, clawed hand, but stopped short of reaching out to her. Instead, it seemed to almost "The core is the heart of this ship," it explained, its voice becoming more controlled, more formal. "It is what binds this vessel, this entity, together, and it is what chose you." "Chose me?" Sarah repeated, a sense of dread creeping up her spine. "But I don't understand. I'm just a—" "You're no ordinary human," the creature interrupted, its tone darkening. You are the one who has been chosen to awaken the ancient forces that lie dormant within this ship. You unlocked the power of the core, and now the consequences of that choice must be faced. Sarah's head spun. Her mind was racing to keep up with the creature's words, but the pieces weren't fitting together. She had no idea what this core was, what this ship was, or why she was somehow connected to it. But there was one thing she knew for certain. She wasn't going to get any answers by standing here frozen in confusion. "Okay," Sarah said slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But why me? Why was I chosen? What's going to happen now?" The creature seemed to hesitate before answering, its expression softening slightly, though still wary. "The truth of why you were chosen is beyond the understanding of your kind, but it is not a simple matter. The forces you have awakened are ancient, tied to the origins of this ship and the beings who once controlled it, and now, you will see what you have unleashed." The creature extended its hand once again, and this time Sarah didn't flinch. There was something in its gesture, something almost comforting. Tentatively, she placed her hand in its large, clawed one. It was surprisingly warm, the energy within the creature's skin like a deep, pulsing heat. "Come," it said, guiding her toward the far end of the room, where another door slid open with a soft, metallic hiss. Sarah took a deep breath and followed it. The ship seemed to pulse with life, each step she took resonating with the strange energy that filled the air. The further she walked, the more she felt the weight of something old and powerful pressing down on her chest. There was a sense of gravity to this place, as though it wasn't just her mind and body being affected, but something far greater, some unseen force tugging at the very fabric of reality itself. The corridor beyond the door was even more elaborate than the room she had just left. Vines stretched across the walls, their bioluminescence casting odd shadows on the floor. Strange symbols, like the one she had seen earlier, covered the walls in intricate patterns, constantly shifting and changing like a living language. At the end of the hall, the creature stopped. It turned to her, its eyes glowing faintly once again. "What you are about to see cannot be undone. Be prepared, for the path ahead will challenge everything you think you know." Sarah nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was ahead, but there was no turning back now. The door ahead of them slid open with a sound like a deep sigh. Beyond it was a vast chamber, unlike anything she had ever imagined. The room stretched up into the darkness above, the ceiling lost in shadows. But in the center of the room stood a towering structure, something ancient and monolithic, like a colossal tree made of stone and light. Its roots stretched out into the floor, and its branches spread out like a vast web across the walls. And at the heart of it, Sarah saw the core. It was a glowing orb, much like the one she had touched earlier, but much larger, its surface swirling with colors she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The energy that radiated from it was both beautiful and terrifying, like a storm contained in a single point of light. It pulsed in rhythm with Sarah's heartbeat, as if it was alive, aware of her presence. The creature stepped forward, moving toward the core with reverence. Sarah followed, drawn inexplicably toward it, her hand reaching out before she even realized what she was doing. "This," the creature said softly, "is the heart of everything. It is the power that once controlled this ship, this species, and the galaxy itself. But now it is dormant, waiting for you to unlock its secrets." Sarah's fingers hovered just inches above the surface of the orb. She could feel its energy coursing through the air, like a charge before a storm. Her breath quickened as she felt it calling to her, beckoning her closer. You must make a choice, the creature continued. Touch the core again, and you will awaken its full power. But understand this, that power is not just knowledge, it is destruction. It is the force that has torn apart entire worlds, civilizations lost to time. If you awaken it fully, you will not be able to control it. The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment Sarah stood there frozen, her mind whirling with fear and confusion. What will happen if I don't touch it? She asked, her voice trembling. Then this ship will never fully awaken, the creature replied, its voice hardening. And the force that follows will find another way. You have no choice. Sarah turned back to the orb, her heart pounding in her chest. It was the truth, the terrible, inevitable truth. There was no turning back from this. She could feel the energy building around her, pulling her closer to the core, urging her to make the final decision. You are the key, the voice in her mind whispered again. The choice is yours to make. Slowly, Sarah extended her hand, and with a single motion, she touched the surface of the core. But then, as the light reached its peak, it suddenly all stopped. The room fell silent, and the vibrations in the air ceased.